Hello, my name is Lonnie Douglas. I'm with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network. And Tom?
My name is Thomas Brown. I'm with the ESSN Solidarity Action Network. We've been doing these interviews because of the COVID-19 isolation that's going on right now. Makes it really hard for a campaign for candidates to get their word out. They can't go door knocking or have rallies, so we're here for them.
Cool.
We'd
So,
like to let you know, though, that we're not endorsing any candidates. We're just presenting your message to the public so that they know who you are.
cool.
Go on, Lonnie.
Yeah, again, not an endorsement, but we're here with Candice King, right?
King, yeah, you know my
Okay,
last name.
well, your email had a different thing on it, so it was a new email. So I was like, did she change her name? It threw me off.
No.
So Candice King, who is running for Ward 1. Am I right?
Correct.
There you go. There's so many wards. So we're going to give Candice, why don't we go ahead and give you some time to just tell people about yourself.
Okay, hi. First, I just want to thank ESSN and SAN for providing this platform to help candidates get out the word about their campaigns and what we hope to achieve through our campaigns. Of course, the COVID situation, as well as just the difficulty of running a political campaign, even on the local level, are usually barriers, but this is really an equalizer for people who intend to pursue office. So thank you guys so much for all your efforts toward this and the great questions. So I hope I can do them some justice. Just going right into it. So my name's Candice King. My family and I live on Calapooya land in Eugene in Ward 1, and I'm running for City Council in that ward as part of the Solidarity Platform. The Solidarity Platform is comprised of local candidates organized around a shared platform. We campaign to claim space in the process, assert marginalized principles, and build movement around core tenets of climate urgency, bottom line human rights, regenerative economic modeling, empowered democracy, and decolonization. Those are a lot of big words, maybe seem jargony, but what it really boils down to is we want to insert a narrative that is not typically considered or spoken within the public or political sphere. I'm running because many of our neighbors, especially here in Ward 1, are dead tired of business as usual in local politics, but are discouraged from engaging with the process because it's not accessible to them. They don't think that local governments reflect their values or respect their cultures. And I'm running in Eugene because Eugene is anything but a typical American city. And I believe that we should be a model for how cities make meaningful, deliberate steps away from reactionary changes and toward resilience. I'm not running because I think I can fix everything, or because I have all the answers, or because I'm some perfect person. I'm far from it. There is a great pool of candidates in this election, and I'm sure they're all concerned, smart, capable people. And while they are concerned with the next best policy, I am concerned with the process. And I'll get to more about that later. But I'm running because I bring skills to the table that, while typically dismissed, reflect a chunk of what is missing from the political spectrum and in rooms where decisions are made for the rest of us. So I have skills like cultural competency, language skills, analytical skills, surveying and facilitation skills of a social scientist. And I have the humanitarian compassion and contemporary training, research-based practices, and field experience of an advocacy worker. And so, like I said, while a lot of times those are considered not that important skills in the political spectrum, And a lot of people might be concerned that those don't cut the mustard for what we need for the city of Eugene. I also couple those skills with highly developed scientific and practical education, hands-on experience in environmental science, sustainable development, agricultural food chain analysis. I have extensive training in equity building, fostering civic engagement, and a reputation for speaking the truth to power when the situation necessitates it. Now, if you want more details about what that means and what I've done, you can ask me for my CV. You can email me at raisedplanet@gmail.com, and I will send you my CV. However, that is not the issue. My CV and my credentials are not the issue, because experience in politics is one thing, but what do we hope to gain by having more people who are experienced in more of the same? So I'm running because I bring what I consider to be a divergent strategy and approach to decision making and the way we communicate about our civic and policy situations. So I just want to address how I'm able to do this, because I work full time. I have a big family, 4 kids. I'm married, and I'm married to a great partner who really supports everything that I do and all of my zany ideas. And I've had a lot of great role models and mentors in my life so far, so I'm strong and capable to do things at a breakneck pace like I typically do. I have some professional experience that is relevant to a lot of what we're facing in the city of Eugene. I work as the housing liaison at Homes for Good Housing Agency, where I am charged with the great task and privilege of helping marginalized people and people who need to seek low income and affordable housing to secure places rather than slip through the cracks.
Well, thank you. Need my glasses, sorry.
You want, okay.
I just want to call out that I'm like not in the best position because my Wi-Fi crapped out at the last minute. So.
No problem.
So, okay.
So you want to hit the first question, Tom?
Yeah, I've got it here.
Cool.
It doesn't take a crystal ball to see that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force yet more residents onto the streets. How will you respond to the immediate spike in homelessness and housing instability? And what measures will you take over the longer term to help Eugene's unhoused?
Okay, so this question is right in my wheelhouse in many ways. Oh, my internet connection is unstable, so I'm gonna move.
Yeah, mine does that.
Oh no.
It should just soldier on through. So we haven't lost it yet.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that they. Oh shoot! We have all kinds of problems. Let's see. Okay, so back to your question. I actually don't believe that it's a foregone conclusion that an economic recession that we're facing is going to push people out of housing. The reason I don't believe that is because evidence has shown in the past that, yes, while recession economics are scary and our housing market is already challenged and we already see a number of people going into the streets and being displaced from their housing on a daily basis, we can anticipate that when a recession strikes, the market, what the market can bear in terms of housing prices actually starts to slide downwards, which is something that actually would be beneficial for a place like the city of Eugene that's just so housing challenged in terms of our space and availability, and then in addition, the amount of rents that are being charged. That said, it's all about who has the economic power and the position and the ability to make those decisions about what we do next to enforce policies that ensure that the housing market, if it is such a market, follows an actual market pattern. And I think that the city council is currently and in the future poised to make some specific moves and policies that will address just that fact. And I think that you can't really, I don't think, so my background is in economics, and as a person who has studied that field extensively, you know, we don't like to make predictions, but we can try to anticipate what sort of interventions the market would potentially need based off of different scenarios. So I think that leading into that, we should do some analysis, and we should do what I consider more pluralistic approach or a heterodoxic approach to economic analysis, which looks at potential problems through projections from multiple different perspectives and potential vantage points, and different options for intervention. So while I do think that the City Council has a role in intervening, I don't think that we can be prescriptive about this in the lead up, because like I said, economists don't like to make projections or predictions. And additionally, 5 years ago, who could have anticipated, aside from, you know, a small subset of people who were actively involved in trying to pressure the city government to do something, that we would be in the position that we're in today. So, you know, without saying, you know, making empty platitudes about what we should do for housing, I think that the key and the solution to housing is using divergent strategy and being opportunistic. So if the housing market crumbles because we are facing a recession, how can we use policy, use financial tools, use collective wealth, and use alternative strategies to encourage more home ownership among people who would typically not have access to those because the price of the housing market is dropping, but but people don't have the liquid and disposable income and or credit to be able to access that. So just as a reflection of what happened in 2008, let's not allow large corporations to consolidate more of the housing under one or two or three pools, and in lieu of the fact that people don't have liquid resources.
Thank you.
So I just had a follow up. So it sounds like what you're
Mhm.
saying is if the market goes you know, a certain way, and let me see if I, because you're up here and I'm kind of down here when it comes.
I'm sorry, I don't try to
No,
be
no, that's cool. But it sounds like what you're saying is instead of letting the developers and the big money you know, companies that have, you know, thousands and thousands of units of rentals in Oregon, in the country, instead of letting them buy it up, we should be encouraging or helping people buy them up, like buy the homes or get into the homes, and not let
sure.
that, I mean, that's kind of what I was getting from you, is not letting the big giant corporations take our homes and stick them into their portfolios, but actually figuring out how to help you know, residents in Eugene stay in their homes or buy their homes. Do you have any I mean, do you have any ideas on how we would do that? Because I like that idea. I just, you know.
Sure. So, you know, to try to boil it down to a nutshell, there are corporations who operate here in the city of Eugene and in Lane County who own rental properties that span the globe. There is a company that operates here that owns rental units in Mexico, Spain, Italy, Eugene, California, Philadelphia. I mean, the list just goes on, and they continue to grow. And so what we saw in 2008 was that the market concentrated under, you know, the market of housing that became available for very low prices, concentrated under the hands of corporations like that. And those corporations grew and grew richer. And in the meantime, they didn't do us any favors for all of the sacrifice that we made with the housing market. They increasingly raised the rents, contributing to the desperate housing crisis that's not just here in Eugene, although very severe here in Eugene, unlike any other place I've ever seen, but that is plaguing the entire country. So some ideas about how we could get property into the hands of people. First of all, I think keeping people in their homes at an affordable rate is a number one, you know, least a strategy of least resistance. And we could do that by operating community partnerships and collaborative agreements with our local banks and credit unions that would allow people to refinance, have some room in their mortgages, have some room in the properties that they own, not necessarily draw out equity, but just have a little space to regain their economic position that they had maybe before this recession or the pandemic hit. Because there are a lot of people who are suffering financially, and they're going to be facing some real consequences, but there's no sense in putting people out on the streets when banks can't live in houses. People need to live in houses. So that's point one. The other thing is, we have this issue here in Lane County, but in Eugene and Springfield in particular, which, I mean, the Eugene City Council can only do things for Eugene, which is that our urban growth boundaries kind of limit our ability to continue to build and grow within the core of the city. And at the pace that we need to accommodate the number of people who are here, who are displaced from housing, potentially children who would grow up in this community who would then need housing if they want to stay, and people who are coming here. So one approach that I've been working to develop, and I intend to continue to develop even after the city council race is over, whether or not I win, is to build models that are replicative and accessible for people who otherwise would not be able to access purchasing housing, coupling with the concentrated zoning restrictions that are lifted, that are becoming lifted here in the city of Eugene. Couple creative financial tools and the ability for people to buy collectively or buy through no interest or nonprofit financial tools that would allow them to access housing that they would not otherwise be able to access during an opportune moment when the market is actually low in prices.
Okay.
So there's just a couple ideas.
What would you do about when some banks buy houses that are in foreclosure, and then they take them off the market, so they're just sitting vacant? How would you deal with that? Just a quick idea, if you have one.
I mean, I think that, you know, we have to as a city be aware and vigilant that we're observing that banks aren't doing that. Foreclosures take a long time. And I think in the amount of time that we would have to intervene within the foreclosure process, we would be able to come up with some creative and strategic and potentially divergent new fangled tools that would allow us to keep people in their homes and also get people into homes that otherwise wouldn't be able to access them.
So why don't we move on to the next question? Thank you. And it's about the payroll tax. So last June,
Sure.
the council passed a payroll tax. They're going to start collecting that tax in July from workers and business owners. They actually voted to not allow the tax to go to the voters, to be voted on by the voters. So the question is,
I'm well aware.
what do you think? What is your stance on payroll taxes in general? And what's your stance on them not all? Do you believe that they should have allowed it to go to the voters?
Okay, so to answer your first part of the question, I don't have a problem paying my taxes, much like my fellow candidate from the Solidarity Platform in Ward 1 for City Council. I believe in paying your fair share of what it takes to run and operate a city, especially if you want a safe, clean, healthy city. It requires money. So we do have to chip in as citizens, especially for those of us who are benefiting from the relatively strong economy that we have here. That said, I also hold the belief, and it's pretty well vetted and backed up by research, that payroll taxes tend to be regressive and have the strongest impact on people who are at the lowest end of the economic spectrum, particularly working class. In this case, particularly lower income people who are working in the city of Eugene, and so working in the city of Eugene, meaning not necessarily residing here or benefiting from the purpose of the payroll tax, which is to increase public safety, but people who perhaps maybe live in Springfield or Creswell or one of the outerlying municipalities, but have their labor here in Eugene, they will also be subject to paying that tax. But what this question really speaks to is my concerns about the process. A lot of people have, and my other candidates that in this election, like I said, are qualified, concerned, compassionate people, and I really do believe in their vision for the city of Eugene. With the exception of one thing, we cannot continue business as usual here in the city. What business as usual produces is a lot of policies that are relatively disjointed, siloed, if you will, from one another, and they don't feed into an overall mission. And in order to capture that, to capture an overall mission that would convey and foster a process that would make our policy making sensible and accessible rather than what we experienced last June with the payroll tax, we actually have to sit down and analyze our processes and consider what ordinances govern how we make rules and policies here, and how those interact with things like accessibility for people who experience disabilities, accessibility for people who speak other languages, people who have families. My experience with the city council meetings in Eugene is that I want to show up. I wanted to show up for the payroll tax, but the best I can do is stand outside and hold a sign because I have a large family. And by the time Monday rolls around, I get off work at 5. I have kids, we got to feed them, we got to get them squared away. And I also at the time had a 2-year-old, and trying to enter the city council hall with a child of any age, but especially a small child, you basically get death stared. So what I experienced was that it was inaccessible, but I had something to say, and I had a legitimate concern for the payroll tax because I live in Ward 1, and what I understood the payroll tax to be purposed for was to increase the ability for police to respond to calls for service, but also had done some research, as I always do before attending a meeting, and realized that calls for service actually declined in 2018, in the year that the data was being pulled from that justified the payroll tax. Sure, there were some concessions and some piecemeal add-ins for things like fire and safety, and I think cahoots perhaps, but the real issue was we didn't know what was in that ordinance before it actually got to the public, because it was unclear how the spending allocations were going to be or how the spending was going to be allocated. So one of the issues is that the city is only required to notify the public with a minimum of 10 days notice. And in this case, they did that. So before the public hearing, they gave us 10 days in the Register Guard printed, oh, we're going to pass a payroll tax. And that time, they opted not to bring it before the public for a vote. It was a foregone conclusion that this payroll tax was going to pass. And what I saw this as was railroading democracy. We didn't have enough time to, for concerned people who would be impacted the most, to get the information, understand the information, and then potentially respond to their individual city council representatives or the mayor with their concerns. And then in the meeting structure, people who are able to attend first, so people who maybe get off work earlier or who have more free time on their hands, are the ones who are able to access the podium to speak. And even though the resounding response to the payroll tax vote at that time was negative from the public, the city council still proceeded to vote for it, because I think there's this attitude or this ethos within government, and this is everywhere, that if the police or if a public agency or entity asks for something, we have to do our best to provide it. But in the case of this safety bill, I live in Ward 1. I see what happens here in terms of what the police are doing, operating. This is one of the most heavily policed areas in town. And at the time that they were passing the payroll tax, I multiple times observed our city of Eugene police officers harassing people on the streets who appeared to be unhoused, people who were digging through trash, which I know is a nuisance, but it's also not a foregone conclusion that they're going to make a mess. And they are pulling recyclables out of the garbage stream, so that's a positive impact. Also, speeding around the neighborhood, and one of my pet peeves is revving your engine, wasting gas, especially in an SUV, to speed and hop corners in a neighborhood that's populated with a lot of children. So I had a lot of misgivings about the purpose of the payroll tax in the first place, how it was going to be, how the revenues were going to be gathered, and then also the lack of information about how it would be distributed. And so once that vote passed, I volunteered with ESSN to circulate petitions, which unfortunately we did not meet our goal, but we did work very hard in the following weeks to try to get enough signatures to repeal that vote.
Yeah. You have a follow-up there, Lonnie, or you're muted?
You're muted, Lonnie.
Sorry, I said no follow-up. That was good.
All right. The need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers, affordable housing activists, and labor groups at odds. How will you manage the conflict between the 1% and the rest of the community?
So I actually don't think that the division is a 1% and the rest of the community. I think that there's like a 27%, or what we would consider the upper quintile of people who seem to have the most impact and power and decision making, and the largest voice in terms of what happens with Eugene policy, land allocation, and incentive contracts or deals for development. And I do think that affordable housing development is necessary and important. What I don't think is that it has to happen in one way, and in the way that it has been happening traditionally. First of all, it's a slow process. Building new apartment complexes, doing affordable housing development requires lots of zoning, studies, lots of land use surveys, public buy-in, proof in the pudding, and contracts that can extend the process to actually get an affordable housing development off the ground, to a 2 to 3 year process or longer sometimes. And people don't have 2 to 3 years to live on the streets. People don't have 2 to 3 years to pay rents that are astronomical when their income is not meeting the amount that the rents are increasing. So what I think, like I said earlier, and I'll repeat myself again, creative, divergent, diversity of strategies to get housing into the hands of people who would not otherwise be able to afford it. I'm a strong proponent of collective housing development, and we have the zoning position now in place in the city of Eugene that even in the core of the city, we can do that. And what I mean is we can use the tools that the systems that we have already allow for, like LLCs, coupled with nonprofit structures, to lower the cost of housing and make it accessible for people who maybe are on a fixed income. We can also offer incentives to people who have fixed incomes, who own existing property, to not become new landlords, because that's the last thing anybody wants to do when they're retired or when they're already struggling with their own concerns, but to foster agreements between people that would allow more people to access housing. We can build affordable and environmentally sustainable housing on existing land and create more owners and not more landlords.
All right. Outstanding. You have a follow-up there, Tom, or? Oh, you're muted now.
I'm just being polite, How would you ensure that every income bracket has housing availability?
super interesting because so I'll plug the website now, and then I'll kind of go into a little bit of what it actually says. So if folks are interested in seeing the fully developed plan, they can go to our website, solidarityplatformeugene.org. They can click on Candice King. They can look at my blog page. And in there is a proposal that I developed for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee that is charged with creating the initiatives and developing the strategy moving forward for how we're going to use the construction excise tax. And in that proposal, I outlined that while, yes, it is important that we do build affordable housing, the need that is so great right now that we need to try to target our housing policy and initiatives in the upcoming couple of years based on serving the people who we are actually trying to house. So once again, I'll repeat, a diversity of strategies, but in this case, outlined based off of the income bracket and personal situation and conditions that people are experiencing related to their housing needs. I am intimately aware and involved in this particular area of our city concerns, because as the housing liaison for our public housing agency, my job is to help house people, but also I developed and facilitated a group of housing navigators that span Lane County so that we could de-silo the community service and public agencies that serve people who are trying to get housed, so that we could all have equal information about how to help people who experience income disparities or disabilities access housing. So one of the main groups of people in this community who we often see end up without housing are people who have fixed incomes, who either experience a disability or a physical disability or a mental health disability. And what that looks like is when you see a guy on the street with a walker who's unhoused, chances are he couldn't find a first floor unit. So we need units that don't have stairs. We need units that have elevators. We need more accessible units that are perhaps small or transitional. We need boarding houses with some first floor units. One of the biggest cries for assistance, help, resources from housing navigators in Lane County is, how will I get this person housed? They have a wheelchair and there are no downstairs units. So one of the initiatives that I definitely back is not pressuring, but encouraging local property managers, especially the big ones, to allocate or to focus on making sure that when downstairs first floor units become available, they target those at populations who would need that housing. Another initiative that I've considered or that I've outlined in that proposal is transitional housing for families who are either experiencing an income shock, low income, often people will work and then have a disabling event occur, and that will throw them into an economic turmoil and they end up unhoused. This is especially devastating when it happens to families because then we also have to add kids into the equation, and it's even more difficult to house people when they can't afford a 1-bedroom and they have to have a 2 or 3-bedroom. So we need transitional housing for families, modular units. We need opportunities for people to access co-housing and collective housing communities. We need to build onto the infrastructure that we already have here in Eugene, as well as expand the resources of the public agencies and community service agencies that we have serving people. But most importantly, first and foremost, we need to start trusting the land to the city, to the people of the city of Eugene. So when land becomes available, the city of Eugene needs to take strong and meaningful steps toward making sure that that land stays in the hands of the people of the city of Eugene, so it can be accessible, affordable, and serve the people here in the long term.
All right.
Thank you.
Outstanding. So the we're going to go ahead and do a follow-up because we're going to have to take and tie this up so we can go to our next interview.
Sure.
But 2 to 3 minutes, what's your vision for the city of Eugene and how will you bring that vision about as an elected official?
I moved to Eugene in 2016. I haven't been here forever, but I moved here because after extensive research about where I was going to move on the West Coast from Kentucky, I decided that Eugene was, and the Willamette Valley in general, was poised to be one of the most climate stable environments that we are facing, just based off of weather patterns and global streams. However, and I also came here because the city was coined as, and is in many ways, a city of resilience and a city with a strong progressive attitude. I want to see us take that culture that is part of Eugene and embrace it. I don't want to see us embrace the culture of let's be an American city like every other American city. Let's build downtown outdoor malls where people can buy overpriced crap, but no, there's nothing to do and nothing's affordable for people who actually live there. My vision for Eugene is a city that is a beacon of resilience and a leader in showing the rest of the country and showing especially mid-sized cities across the United States how one city can make meaningful and direct efforts to step away from the policy and process of reactionary politics and move toward resilient, sustainable environmental policies. First, do no harm. That means not approving projects that will harm the environment in exchange for something like cap and trade. I envision us moving forward and showing other cities how we can treat our labor force with respect and start taking making initiatives to bring down the amount that people actually work. One thing that COVID has taught us is that we don't have to show up to get the job done, and we don't have to show up 40 hours a week to get the job done. In fact, research shows that people are more productive when they work fewer hours per week. So, just taking those really millennium-based progressive initiatives that will usher Eugene into the 21st century, before 2035, as a city that is prepared to embrace the concerns, wants, and desires of the generation that's next in line to lead us.
Outstanding. All right. Well, thank you, Candice. We appreciate you coming. Did you want to give the website again one more plug?
Sure. Check us out, solidarityplatformeugene.org. Also, just a plug, we're going to be out on 7th Street tomorrow, block by block, individual by individual, sharing signs. Please, I invite people to make signs and put them in your yard, make them from recyclable or found materials, and also print a sign and put it in your window if you live in an apartment. Thank you so much for the time, folks, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.